Nigeria is dealing with, as I mentioned 20 years ago, an opportunistic hydra. Some of the things you've discussed here tonight, some of them are primary threats. Some of them are existential threats to the country. Some are secondary. Some are tertiary. Now, if we want to know what to do, we must separate the primary threats from the secondary. So I will say to you there are 4 things that we mentioned 20 years ago. There are 4 things that we mentioned 20 years ago that have to be taken care of. And it's up to you to decide whether they have been taken care of. Number 1, we said the architecture of thought of the Nigerian government must be 20 steps ahead of that of the enemy. The primary enemy, the greatest existential threat we are facing, which is terrorism. And we know that when it comes to architecture of thought, the greatest problem of the Nigerian, and not just the Nigerian, the African world, is the mathematization of the inquiry. Number 2, we talked about the military more than 20 years ago, and we said the days of Clausewitz is gone, Trinity of War. And I like the fact that the CDS spoke about asymmetrical warfare. He spoke about hybrid threats. Now, maybe he didn't mention media as a force expander. But I know that as of 18 years ago, we had mentioned that the military contribution to the solution of this problem is not more than about 36%. So it is good that it is now that the military has come out to explain to the public that this thing doesn't have a military solution as the sole solution alone. Then number 3, I think he was the one, somebody earlier on mentioned the ideology. Now, the ideology is something that has to be tackled, that has not yet been tackled. Now, why are we saying this? Every single one of us here lives on 2 levels of life. There's the external that the law can control, and then there's the internal. Now, since this new form of war came into being, everybody knows that it is the ideas inside the hearts that have been weaponized. And when you mix a philosophy with a religious system and you mix it together, you have something explosive in hand. And you must come up with an ideology that will be national, that can checkmate that. Now, the 4th thing is the value system of the country. The greatest war going on all over the world right now is the war of narratives. Now, the value system is such that if an average citizen has nothing to lose, the value system is such that if in the engine room of the country, we still continue to allow ourselves to be ruled by partitions that were drawn up in 1914, then brother cannot be brother's keeper, and who is going to be ready to make sacrifices? I attended Ahmadu Bello University. I've moved and walked across Nigeria for God and country. It's a wonderful country, and I believe it will survive. But in closing, let me just say this. The most important factor that I think is missing in this conversation so far is what I call the glocal dimension. The fact that the threat that we are discussing here, the primary threat we are discussing here, as mentioned in snatches by the CDS, and somebody also who spoke about funding, we are facing a localized threat with a global dimension, global type of intelligence. Whether you're talking funding or you're talking opportunistic, now you are dealing with something that is so intelligent that the architecture of thought within Nigeria cannot handle it alone. Now, listen to me. We have had former presidents who had sicknesses and diseases who would have died if they did not reach out beyond the local degree of knowledge in the area of medicine when it came to the problems that they had. So there's nothing strange about the fact that this also has a global dimension to it that we must take care of if we are serious. Now, let me say this. If you remember Kaplan's book, 1994, The Coming Anarchy.
Yeah.
If you ever looked at Henry Kissinger's World Order, published in 2014, and then mix it with Huntington's 1996 Clash of Civilizations, not to mention Francis Fukuyama, there is nothing surprising about what is going on in Nigeria today. Think tanks all over the world foresaw this. They've looked at it. Most nations of the world have readjusted. It's a war of narratives. They've readjusted to match this thing, and we are still waiting for Nigeria to realize that it is a global problem. Global, not local, but global. It's a localized space of a hydra. And part of the challenge we have right now, you heard Governor Lawal speaking diplomatically. The reason why Governor Lawal has to be diplomatic is because we are losing the war of narratives. If the war of narratives is right and the average Nigerian is ready to die for his country, then see a single person. Look, don't forget that I've worked in this field for 20 years. We've been in contact with the poor boys in the army. I'm not talking about the people at the top heavy, but the young boys who are being sent out to die. When even people like us can already see that if you go out this way without equipping them with this and that, these boys are going to die. So I'm just saying that for this town hall to yield the proper food, we need to bring in what I call the glocal. That is the global inputs behind the localized form of the threats. You know, I thank God the CDS already spoke about hybrid threats. He spoke about asymmetrical warfare. He spoke about foreign funding. And I'm saying to you that what you're doing right now actually covers what we call the force expander, where media is a force expander. Let me remind us, as you are listening to this program, the whole of this nation is listening. The leaders who are the greatest enemies of the country are also listening. And I want to tell you something. There is no point if your enemies are already deploying artificial intelligence and they listen to us speaking at this level. In fact, after all we have said, they even draw more conclusions and then push some buttons to advance this. So please, let's add the glocal to this, and then there will be a tomorrow for us.